I was halfway down the wooded trail with my dog when a woman materialized in front of me like she had been waiting in ambush, her hands planted on her hips and her face already red with fury. "No trespassing," she screamed, her voice echoing through the pines. "This is private property. You need to leave right now." I stopped walking. My dog, a 10-year-old shepherd mix named Zeke, sat down beside me and looked up at the woman with mild curiosity. The morning sun filtered through the longleaf pines, casting dappled shadows across the gravel path. It was barely 8 in the morning, and I had been walking this land since dawn, checking the boundary markers and noting where the invasive species were creeping in along the eastern edge. "Madam," I said, keeping my voice level, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," she snapped. "This is HOA property, residents only. You don't live here, so you need to turn around and leave before I call the police." I took a breath. This was not the first time someone had questioned my presence on land I managed, but it never got easier. I was Marcus Hammond, a conservation land trust manager, and I had been working in land stewardship for the past 12 years. This particular tract, 240 acres of mixed hardwood and pine forest bordering the Laurel Ridge HOA community in Flat Rock, North Carolina, had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather had bought it in 1962, and when he died, he had placed it in a family trust with me as the primary steward. "I'm not trespassing," I said carefully. "I'm the land manager here." Her eyes narrowed. "Land manager? For who?" "For the Hammond Family Land Trust. This property belongs to my family." She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Nice try. This land is part of the Laurel Ridge amenities package. It's been here since before I moved in 5 years ago. Everyone knows that." "Everyone is mistaken," I said. "The HOA property line ends at the stone wall about a quarter-mile back. Everything beyond that belongs to the trust." Her face flushed darker. "I am the amenities director for this community. I would know if we were bordering private land." "You're lying." I could feel my jaw tightening. Zeke pressed against my leg, sensing my tension. "I'm not lying. There are boundary markers all along the property line. There's also a sign further up the trail that clearly identifies this as trust land." "A sign?" She crossed her arms. "I've walked this trail 100 times. There's no sign." "There is," I said. "You just haven't looked for it. Or you're making it up to avoid getting in trouble." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the police. You can explain your story to them." "Go ahead," I said. I was tired, and I still had 3 more hours of work to do before my afternoon meeting with the County Conservation Board. "But while we're waiting, maybe you could walk up the trail with me and look at that sign." "I'm not going anywhere with you." She held her phone up like a weapon. "You stay right there." I stayed. Zeke lay down at my feet. The morning was warming up and the air smelled like pine sap and wild honeysuckle. I could hear a pileated woodpecker hammering away somewhere deeper in the forest. This was supposed to be the peaceful part of my day, the part where I could walk the land and think through the conservation strategies we needed to implement before the next growing season. The woman was talking into her phone now, her voice sharp and insistent. "Yes, I need an officer at the Laurel Ridge Trail entrance. There's a man trespassing on HOA property and he's refusing to leave." I waited. I had my identification in my truck, parked at the northern access point about a mile from here. I also had the trust documents, the survey maps, and the original deed my grandfather had recorded at the Henderson County Courthouse. I kept copies in my truck because situations like this, while rare, were not unheard of. 10 minutes passed. The woman stood in the middle of the trail, glaring at me. I leaned against a pine tree and checked my email on my phone. There was a message from Deanna Jenkins, the county naturalist I had been working with on a forest inventory project. She wanted to know if she could come out this afternoon to photograph some of the old growth specimens in the southern section. I typed back a quick yes and told her I might be running late. A Henderson County Sheriff's deputy arrived 15 minutes later, walking up the trail from the direction of the HOA entrance. He was young, maybe late 20s, with a professional demeanor and tired eyes. "Morning," he said, looking between the woman and me. "I'm Deputy Collins." "Someone want to tell me what's going on?" The woman jumped in immediately. "This man is trespassing on community property. I asked him to leave and he refused. He's being hostile and threatening." I bit back a response to the word threatening and waited for the deputy to look at me. "Sir," he said, "I'm Marcus Hammond. I manage the Hammond Family Land Trust, and this property is part of that trust. The HOA boundary ends about a quarter-mile back at the stone wall. She seems to believe this is HOA land, but it's not." Deputy Collins pulled out a small notebook. "You have any documentation?" "In my truck. It's parked at the northern access point." "That's convenient," the woman said. "Of course his documentation is somewhere else." The deputy held up a hand. "Madam, let me handle this." "Sir, how far is your truck?" "About a mile up the trail." He nodded slowly. "And you said there's a sign somewhere that marks this as trust property?" "Yes, about half a mile ahead near the fork where the trail splits toward the ridge." "I've never seen a sign," the woman insisted. "Let's go look," Deputy Collins said. He gestured up the trail. "Lead the way, Mr. Hammond." We walked in a strange, tense procession. I led, with Zeke trotting beside me. Deputy Collins followed, and the woman brought up the rear, muttering under her breath. The trail climbed gradually, winding through stands of oak and hickory. The understory was thick with mountain laurel and rhododendron, and the morning light was turning golden as it filtered through the canopy. "You do this full time?" Deputy Collins asked as we walked. "Land management?" "Yes. I work for a regional conservation trust, and I also manage my family's land. This tract has been in my family since the 60s. That's a long time. My grandfather bought it when black families could finally start purchasing property in this area without being run off. He worked 3 jobs to afford it, wanted to make sure we had something that couldn't be taken away." The deputy nodded but didn't say anything. The woman behind us made a noise that might have been a scoff. We reached the fork in the trail. To the left, the path continued up toward the ridge. To the right, it curved down toward a small creek that marked the eastern boundary of the trust land. And there, nailed to a thick oak tree at the junction, was the sign. It was weathered, the wood gray with age and the letters faded but still legible. It read, "Hammond Family Land Trust Private Property, Marcus Hammond, Steward, Authorized Access by Permission Only." Deputy Collins stopped in front of it. He pulled out his phone and took a picture. Then he turned to the woman. "Madam, were you aware of this sign?" Her face had gone pale, then flushed red again. I've never walked this far up the trail." "You said you'd walked it 100 times. The lower section. The part that's clearly HOA property." "This says it's private property," the deputy said. "It names Mr. Hammond as the steward." "That matches what he told us." "Anyone could put up a sign," she said, but her voice had lost its edge. "True," Deputy Collins said. "Mr. Hammond, I'd still like to see that documentation if you don't mind." "Not at all. My truck is another half-mile north." We kept walking. The woman followed silently now, her earlier confidence evaporating. When we reached the access point where I had parked, I unlocked the truck and pulled out the waterproof file box I kept in the back seat. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the most recent survey, and a certified copy of the original deed. Deputy Collins examined them carefully. He compared the survey map to his phone's GPS. He read through the trust document. Finally, he handed them back to me. "Everything looks in order, Mr. Hammond. I'm sorry for the confusion." "It's not your fault," I said. He turned to the woman. "Madam, you need to be aware that this is not HOA property. If you continue to use this land without permission, you could be cited for trespassing." "But we've been using it for years," she protested. "The whole community uses these trails. No one ever said anything." "That doesn't make it yours," I said quietly. "And I've asked the HOA to respect the boundary multiple times. I've sent letters. I've attended meetings. No one ever seems to take it seriously." "I never saw any letters," she said. "Then your HOA board isn't communicating with you. That's not my problem." Deputy Collins put away his notebook. "I'm going to file this report as a misunderstanding." "But madam, I need you to understand that Mr. Hammond has every right to restrict access to his property. If he asks you to leave, you need to leave. If you refuse, it becomes criminal trespass." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she just nodded stiffly. "Are we done here?" I asked. "Yes, sir," Deputy Collins said. "Sorry again for the trouble." He walked the woman back down the trail toward the HOA entrance. I stood by my truck, waiting for my heartbeat to slow down. Zeke nuzzled my hand and I scratched behind his ears. "Good boy," I murmured. "Good, patient boy." I finished my morning survey, though the piece of it had been shattered. I documented the invasive autumn olive that was spreading near the creek and made notes about the sections of trail that needed erosion control. By the time I drove back to my office in Hendersonville, it was nearly noon, and I was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical work. My phone rang as I was pulling into the parking lot. It was Deanna Jenkins. "Marcus, hey, I got your email. You still okay with me coming out this afternoon?" "Yeah, that's fine. What time were you thinking? Around 3? I want to photograph that chestnut oak stand while the light is good." "Sounds good. Meet me at the northern access point." "Perfect. See you then." Diana was one of the few people who understood the significance of the land I managed. She was a naturalist with the Henderson County Parks Department, and she had been working on a comprehensive inventory of old-growth forests in the region. The Hammond Trust land had several stands of trees that predated European settlement, and Diana had been documenting them for the past 6 months. She arrived at 3 on the dot, driving a county parks truck with equipment cases stacked in the back. Deanna was in her late 30s, with dark brown hair pulled back in a practical braid and sharp, observant eyes. She wore hiking boots, field pants, and a faded T-shirt from a conservation conference. "Hey," she said, climbing out of the truck. "How was your morning?" "Complicated," I said. I told her about the woman on the trail, the accusation, and the deputy who had to verify my ownership of my own land. Deanna's expression darkened. "Are you serious? She called the cops on you?" "She did." "Let me guess. Karen." I blinked. "I don't know her name." "Why?" "Karen Sutherland. She's the amenities director for Laurel Ridge HOA. I've dealt with her before. She tried to claim that a public trail easement through their community was private property. We had to send her the county records 3 times before she backed down." "Sounds about right," I said. Diana shook her head. "I'm sorry, Marcus, that's exhausting. It is what it is." "No, it's not. It's wrong." She grabbed her camera bag from the truck. "Come on, let's go look at some trees that are older than all of this nonsense." We hiked into the southern section of the property, where the terrain rose steeply, and the forest became a cathedral of ancient hardwoods. The chestnut oaks Deanna wanted to photograph were massive, their trunks wider than I could wrap my arms around, and their canopies reaching well over 100 feet. Some of them were estimated to be more than 300 years old. Deanna worked methodically, setting up shots, adjusting her camera settings and taking notes in a weathered field journal. I watched her work, grateful for the quiet competence and the way she moved through the forest like she belonged there. "These trees were here before the Cherokee were forced out," she said softly, looking up at the canopy. "Before the first white settlers, before any of the boundaries we argue about today." "My grandfather used to say that," I said. "He'd tell me the land doesn't care who owns it. It just keeps growing." Smart man, he was. Deanna lowered her camera and turned to me. "You know, there are county records that document the ownership history of this land. Historical deeds, tax records, all of it. If the HOA keeps giving you trouble, I can pull those records and make sure everyone understands exactly who owns what." "You do that, of course. It's public information anyway, and it's important. This land has a history, and that history matters." She paused. "Also, Karen Sutherland drives me crazy, and I'd enjoy proving her wrong." I laughed despite myself. "I appreciate that." We spent another hour in the forest. Deanna finished her photography, and we walked the boundary line together, checking the markers and talking about the conservation easements I was considering for the property. By the time we hiked back to the trucks, the afternoon light was turning golden, and I felt some of the tension from the morning beginning to ease. "Thank you," I said as Deanna packed up her gear. "For what?" "For believing me. For not questioning whether I belong here." She looked at me with steady, serious eyes. "Marcus, I've read the historical records. I know your grandfather bought this land in 1962. I know he fought to keep it when developers tried to pressure him into selling. I know you've been managing it with more care and knowledge than most professional conservationists I've worked with. You don't need my belief. You belong here because this land is yours and you've earned it 100 times over." Something in my chest loosened. "Still, thank you," she nodded. "If Karen or anyone else from that HOA gives you more trouble, call me. I mean it. I've got the documentation and I'm not afraid to use it." 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the Laurel Ridge HOA. It was signed by Karen Sutherland and the HOA president, a man named Gregory Walsh. The letter informed me that the HOA had been using the trails on adjacent land, under the assumption that they were part of the community's amenities package, and they were requesting a formal meeting to discuss usage rights and access. I called my lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in property and land use law. I had worked with her before when setting up the conservation easements on another trust property. "What do you think?" I asked after reading her the letter. "I think they're realizing they don't have a legal leg to stand on, and they're trying to negotiate," Patricia said. "The question is whether you want to negotiate. I've been asking them to respect the boundary for 5 years. They've ignored every letter I've sent." "Then maybe it's time to stop asking and start enforcing. You have the right to restrict access. You can post additional signage, install gates, whatever you want. It's your land." "I don't want to shut the land down completely," I said. "I've always believed in conservation access when it's done respectfully. But I want it to be on my terms, not because an HOA assumes they own something they don't." "Fair enough. So here's what I suggest. Attend their meeting. Bring documentation. Make it clear that you're the landowner and that any access is a privilege you're extending, not a right they possess. If they want to formalize access for their residents, you can discuss an easement or use agreement, but it needs to be in writing and it needs to acknowledge your ownership. What if they get hostile? Then you walk out and we pursue formal trespass enforcement, but let's hope it doesn't come to that." The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the Laurel Ridge Community Clubhouse. I arrived 10 minutes early with a folder full of documentation and a knot of tension in my stomach. Deanna had texted me that morning offering to come with me, and I had accepted gratefully. She met me in the parking lot, carrying her own folder of county records. "Ready?" she asked. "Not really." "Good. If you were ready, it would mean you're used to this kind of thing, and no one should be used to this." The clubhouse was a sprawling building with a stone facade and large windows overlooking a manicured lawn. Inside, the meeting room was set up with rows of chairs facing a long table where the HOA board sat. Karen Sutherland was there, along with Gregory Walsh and 3 other board members. About 20 residents filled the chairs, murmuring to each other and glancing at me as I walked in. Gregory Walsh called the meeting to order. He was a man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of being listened to. "Before we get to regular business, we have a special agenda item tonight," he said. "As many of you know, there's been some confusion about the trail system adjacent to our community. We've invited Mr. Marcus Hammond to join us this evening to discuss the matter." Confusion. That was one way to put it. I stood up. "Thank you for inviting me. I'm Marcus Hammond. I manage the Hammond Family Land Trust, which includes 240 acres bordering your community to the north. I'm here because there seems to be a misunderstanding about property boundaries." "Mr. Hammond," Karen interrupted, "we've been using those trails for years. Our residents consider them part of the community amenities. We maintain them, we clear fallen trees, we even installed benches." "On land you don't own," I said quietly. "Which is the problem." A ripple of conversation moved through the room. Gregory held up a hand for silence. "Mr. Hammond, can you provide documentation of your ownership?" "I can." I opened my folder and pulled out copies of the trust document, the survey map, and the historical deed. "This land has been in my family since 1962. It's held in a trust that I manage. The HOA boundary ends at the stone wall on the southern edge of the property. Everything north of that belongs to the trust." I passed the documents to Gregory. He examined them, frowning. Karen leaned over to look, her face tight with displeasure. "These could be fakes," someone said from the audience. Deanna stood up. "They're not. I'm Deanna Jenkins, naturalist with Henderson County Parks. I've reviewed the historical records at the county courthouse. Mr. Hammond's grandfather, James Hammond, purchased this land in 1962. The deed has been recorded continuously since then. The trust was established in 1995, and Marcus Hammond was named steward in 2013. Everything is documented and legal." "Who asked you?" Karen snapped. "I did," I said. "Because I knew you'd question the documentation, and I wanted someone here who could verify it independently." Gregory studied the survey map. "If this is accurate, then the trail entrance we've been using is actually on your property." "It is. But we've been using it for years." "Doesn't that give us some kind of claim?" "No," Deanna said firmly. "Continuous use doesn't establish ownership in North Carolina unless it's been exclusive, open, notorious, and adverse for 20 years. And even then it requires specific legal action. The Hammond family has never abandoned this property. They've paid taxes on it continuously. They've managed it actively. You have no claim." Karen's face was red. "This is ridiculous. Everyone knows this land has been open to the community." "Open doesn't mean owned," I said. "I've sent letters to this HOA every year for the past 5 years asking you to inform residents about the property boundary. Those letters were ignored." "I never saw any letters," Gregory said. "Then your previous board didn't share them with you. I have certified mail receipts for all of them." The room erupted in conversation. Residents were talking over each other, some angry, some confused. One woman stood up and pointed at me. "So what, you're just going to shut down the trails? Keep everyone out?" I haven't decided, I said. But that's not the point. The point is that this is my land, and any access needs to be on my terms with my permission, in a way that respects the conservation goals of the trust. Conservation goals, Karen said mockingly. You mean keeping people out? I mean managing the land responsibly. Preventing erosion, controlling invasive species, protecting old-growth forest. Things that don't happen when people treat it like a personal playground. We take care of those trails, she shot back, by installing benches without permission, by clearing trees that were habitat for endangered woodpeckers, by letting dogs run off leash through sensitive understory. How dare you, how dare I? My voice rose, and I felt Deanna's hand on my arm steadying me. I took a breath. How dare I object to people using my land without permission? How dare I ask to be respected as the landowner? Is that really the question you want to ask? The room went silent. Gregory cleared his throat. Mr. Hammond, I think we all need to take a step back here. Clearly, there's been a breakdown in communication. If the previous board received your letters and didn't act on them, that's our failure, not yours. But we have dozens of families who have been using those trails in good faith. Can we find some kind of compromise? I looked at Deanna. She nodded slightly. I'm open to discussion, I said. But it starts with acknowledging that this is trust land, not HOA property. If you want to formalize access for your residents, we can talk about a written use agreement. But it needs to include rules about trail use, limits on modifications to the property, and a clear understanding that the agreement can be revoked if those rules aren't followed. That seems reasonable, Gregory said. He looked at Karen. Don't you think? Karen's jaw was tight. I think this is all very convenient. A piece of paper shows up claiming ownership, and suddenly we're supposed to give up land we've been using for years. It's not a piece of paper, Deanna said coldly. It's a legal document recorded with the county, and Mr. Hammond isn't claiming ownership. He's demonstrating ownership that has existed since before your community was even built. And who are you again? Karen demanded. I'm the person with access to every property record in Henderson County. The person who can prove in front of this entire room that you're wrong. Deanna opened her folder and pulled out a stack of papers. James Hammond purchased this land on August 12, 1962, for $8,000. Here's the original deed. Here's the survey from 1963. Here's the tax record from 1964. Here's the environmental assessment from 1978. Here's the trust document from 1995. Here's the conservation easement Marcus started negotiating in 2018. Do you want me to keep going? Karen's face had gone from red to white. She looked at the papers like they were weapons. The Laurel Ridge development was built in 2001, Deanna continued. 20 years ago. The Hammond family has owned this land for 63 years. You don't have a claim, you never had a claim, and your refusal to acknowledge that doesn't change reality. Gregory picked up one of the documents Deanna had laid on the table. He read it carefully. Then he set it down and looked at me. Mr. Hammond, on behalf of the HOA, I apologize. It's clear we've been in the wrong. What do you need from us? I need the HOA to formally recognize the property boundary. I need signage installed at the trail entrance informing residents that they are entering trust land. And I need a written use agreement that establishes rules for trail access. And if we agree to that, then I'm willing to keep the trails open for respectful use. But if residents violate the rules, or if the HOA tries to claim ownership again, I'll close the access and pursue trespass enforcement. That's blackmail, Karen said. No, Deanna said. That's property rights. Gregory ignored Karen and extended his hand to me. We'll draft a use agreement and send it to you for review, and I'll make sure the signage gets installed within the week." I shook his hand. "Thank you." Karen stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "This is unacceptable. You can't just let him dictate terms." "He's the landowner," Gregory said tiredly. "He can do exactly that. I'm calling a vote. The board needs to contest this." "On what grounds?" Deanna asked. "Please explain to me what legal grounds you have to contest documented ownership going back 63 years. Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She grabbed her papers and stormed out of the meeting room. A few residents followed her, but most stayed, looking uncomfortable. One man stood up. "Mr. Hammond, I just want to say I'm sorry. I had no idea we were trespassing. I thought those trails were part of the HOA. "Thank you," I said. "And you're welcome to keep using them as long as the use agreement gets finalized." A woman raised her hand. "Can you tell us more about the conservation work you do? I'd love to learn about the land." I spent the next 20 minutes talking about the trust, the old growth forests, and the species we were working to protect. Diana added information about her inventory project and the significance of the ancient trees. By the end, several residents were asking if they could volunteer for conservation workdays. When the meeting finally ended, I felt wrung out but cautiously hopeful. Gregory walked Deanna and me to the parking lot. "Again, I apologize," he said. "Karen is passionate about her role, and she doesn't always handle things diplomatically." "She called the police on me," I said. "That's not passion. That's harassment." Gregory winced. "If you want to file a formal complaint, I'd understand. Let's see how the use agreement goes first. But if she pulls something like that again, there will be consequences." "Understood." Deanna and I walked to our vehicles. The night was cool and the parking lot lights cast long shadows. "You did great in there," Deanna said. I shouldn't have raised my voice. "You kept your composure better than I would have. Karen was trying to provoke you." "I know." I leaned against my truck. "Thank you for coming, for backing me up with the records." "That's not backing you up, that's just telling the truth." She paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why do you stay here? Why keep fighting for this land when people keep making it so hard?" I looked out at the dark line of trees beyond the parking lot. "Because my grandfather worked 3 jobs to buy this land. Because he wanted our family to have something that couldn't be taken away. Because land ownership for black families in the South is still fragile, and if I walk away, it proves that they can wear us down. I stay because this land is mine, and I have just as much right to be here as anyone else." Diana nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think your grandfather would be proud of you." "I hope so." She climbed into her truck. "Call me if you need anything, seriously." "I will." The use agreement took 2 weeks to negotiate. Gregory sent me a draft. I sent it to Patricia Chen, and she marked it up with changes. The HOA board reviewed it, made their own edits, and we went back and forth until we had something everyone could live with. The agreement established that the trails were trust property, that access was a privilege granted by the landowner, and that residents needed to follow specific rules. Stay on marked trails, keep dogs leashed, no removal of plants or natural materials, and no modifications to the property without written permission. The HOA also agreed to install signage at the trail entrance. I insisted on approving the text, and after some negotiation, we settled on a simple message. Entering Hammond Family Land Trust. Private property open for respectful use. Please stay on marked trails and observe all posted rules. The signs went up on a Wednesday morning. I drove out to check them and Deanna met me there. "Looks good," she said, examining the sign. It was professional, weather-resistant, and prominently placed. "It does." "How do you feel?" "Tired. Relieved. Still waiting for the other shoe to drop." Karen, Deanna looked thoughtful. You know, I've been thinking. You said you were considering opening part of the land as an education trail. What if we made that happen? What do you mean? I mean a real public trail on your terms. Something with interpretive signage about the old-growth forest, the history of the land, maybe even information about your grandfather and the significance of black land ownership in Appalachia. Make it an official education resource. I stared at her. That's a big project. It is. But I can help. The county would probably support it. We could apply for conservation education grants, and it would establish you as the landowner in a way no one could dispute. It's one thing to have a use agreement with the HOA. It's another thing to have an official public trail with your name on the interpretive signs. You really think that would work? I know it would. And honestly, Marcus, the story of this land deserves to be told. Your grandfather's story deserves to be told. I thought about it. About my grandfather who had worked himself half to death to buy this land. About the trees that had stood here for centuries. About the idea that something good could come out of all this frustration. Okay, I said. Let's do it. We spent the next month planning. Deanna helped me identify a section of trail that showcased the best of the old-growth forest without being too strenuous for most visitors. We mapped out locations for interpretive signs. I wrote text about the history of the land and my grandfather's legacy. Deanna wrote about the forest ecology and the species that depended on these ancient trees. We applied for a conservation education grant through the North Carolina Community Foundation and were approved for $12,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to install proper signage, improve the trail surface in a few key areas, and create a small parking area with an information kiosk. Karen Sutherland was notably absent through all of this. I heard through Gregory that she had been encouraged to focus on other HOA responsibilities and that her role as amenities director was being quietly reassigned. I didn't ask for details. The trail opened on a Saturday in October. We called it the Hammond Heritage Trail, and the turnout exceeded anything I had expected. Deanna had publicized it through the County Parks Department, and I had shared information with the Conservation Trust networks I was part of. More than 50 people showed up for the opening walk, including representatives from the County Conservation Board, several local environmental groups, and a reporter from the Hendersonville Times-News. I stood at the trailhead, looking at the crowd, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pride without reservation. "Thank you all for coming," I said when Deanna introduced me. "This land has been in my family for 63 years. My grandfather bought it at a time when black families in this area were often denied the right to own property, or harassed into selling when they did. He held on to it because he believed that land was legacy, and that what we protect today will be here for the next generation." I gestured at the forest behind me. "These trees are older than any of us. They were here before the boundaries we argue about, before the communities we build. They'll be here after we're gone. My hope is that this trail helps people connect with that continuity. That it reminds us we're part of something bigger than ourselves." The crowd applauded. We walked the trail together, stopping at each interpretive sign. Deanna talked about the ecology. I talked about the history. People asked questions, took photos, and thanked me for opening the land. Halfway through the hike, I noticed a woman standing off to the side, reading one of the signs. She looked familiar, and after a moment I realized it was Karen Sutherland. She saw me looking and stiffened, then turned and walked quickly back toward the parking area. Deanna noticed too. "Should we say something?" "No, let her go." But Karen didn't go far. When we finished the hike and returned to the trailhead, she was waiting by the information kiosk. She looked uncomfortable, her arms crossed defensively. "Miss Sutherland," I said carefully, Can I help you? I wanted to. She stopped, looking at the ground. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I waited. Deanna moved closer, watchful. I was wrong, Karen continued, about the property, about calling the police on you, about all of it. I should have checked before assuming I knew what I was talking about. Yes, I said. You should have. I let my ego get in the way. I wanted to be right and I didn't care what the facts were. She finally looked up at me. I know I can't take it back, but I am sorry for what it's worth. I studied her face. She looked sincere, but apologies were cheap when they came after consequences. I appreciate you saying that, I said. But words are easy. What matters is what you do next. What do you want me to do? Stop assuming you know better than other people about their own lives and their own property. Stop treating people like they don't belong. And if you see someone who looks out of place to you, consider the possibility that you're the one who doesn't understand the situation. She nodded slowly. I can do that. Then we're good. Karen left without another word. Deanna watched her go. Think she meant it? Deanna asked. I don't know, but it's not my job to fix her. I did what I needed to do. The rest is up to her. The reporter from the Hendersonville Times-News approached, asking if she could interview me for a feature article. I agreed, and we spent 20 minutes talking about the trail, the land trust, and the importance of preserving both natural and cultural heritage. The article came out the following week with the headline, Local Conservationist Opens Heritage Trail on Family Land. It was a good article, accurate and respectful, and it brought even more visitors to the trail. The Hammond Heritage Trail became a modest success. Schools started bringing groups out for environmental education. The County Conservation Board cited it as a model for private land stewardship. And slowly, grudgingly, the Laurel Ridge HOA residents began to treat the land with the respect it deserved. There were still occasional issues. Someone let their dog off leash, and I had to send a reminder about the rules. A group of teenagers left trash near the creek, and I had to organize a cleanup. But these were normal management challenges, not existential fights about whether I belonged on my own land. Deanna and I kept working together. The forest inventory project expanded, and she secured funding to study the old-growth forests across the region. I helped her with access and data collection, and she helped me develop long-term conservation plans for the trust land. One evening in late November, after a long day of surveying boundary markers, Deanna and I sat on the tailgate of my truck watching the sun set through the bare trees. The air was cold and sharp, and the sky was streaked with orange and purple. "Can I ask you something personal?" Deanna said. "Sure." "Do you ever think about what happens to this land after you're gone?" I had thought about it. A lot. I want to keep it in the family if I can. Maybe set up a permanent conservation easement so it can't be developed. But I don't have kids and I'm not sure my cousins are interested in land management. What about passing it to a land trust? Not your family trust, but one of the regional conservation organizations. I've considered it, but it feels like giving up. It's not giving up. It's making sure the work continues. She paused. Your grandfather wanted this land to be protected. He wanted it to mean something. If a conservation trust can guarantee that, then you're honoring his legacy. I thought about that. About my grandfather's hands on the deed the day he bought this land. About the way he'd walked these trails with me when I was a boy, teaching me the names of trees and birds. About the weight of responsibility I'd carried for the past 12 years. Maybe you're right, I said. I'm always right, Deanna said, and I laughed. We sat in comfortable silence as the light faded. Zeke was asleep in the truck cab and the forest around us was settling into evening quiet. Thank you, I said. For what? For showing up. For standing with me when I needed someone to. Deanna looked at me, her expression serious. Marcus, I didn't stand with you because you needed someone. I stood with you because you were right and because the story of this land matters. You don't need me to validate that. Maybe not, but it helps. She smiled. Fair enough. 3 weeks later, I received a certified letter from Karen Sutherland's lawyer. My stomach dropped when I saw the return address, and I called Patricia Chen immediately. "What is it?" she asked after I'd explained. "I don't know. I haven't opened it yet." "Open it and read it to me." I tore open the envelope. Inside was a formal letter on law firm letterhead. I read it aloud. "Dear Mr. Hammond, I represent Miss Karen Sutherland in a personal matter. Miss Sutherland has asked me to convey her formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing in the incident that occurred on October 8th, when she confronted you on your property and made a false report to law enforcement. She acknowledges that her actions constituted harassment and caused you distress. As a gesture of accountability, Miss Sutherland is making a donation in your name to the North Carolina Land Trust Alliance in the amount of $5,000. She hopes this demonstrates her sincerity in making amends. Sincerely, Robert Chen, attorney at law." I sat down hard on my office chair. "She donated $5,000, apparently," Patricia said. She sounded amused. "That's an expensive apology." "Why would she do this?" "Probably because her lawyer told her she could face a harassment suit and possibly charges for filing a false police report. This is her way of mitigating the damage. Do I have to accept it? The donation isn't to you. It's to the Land Trust Alliance in your name. You don't have any say in it." Patricia paused. "But if you want my advice, take the win. She's acknowledged wrongdoing in writing, and she's put her money where her mouth is. You could push for more, but honestly, I think this is as good an outcome as you're going to get." I read the letter again. "Okay, I'll let it stand. Good choice, and Marcus, congratulations. You won." I hung up and sat staring at the letter. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving, but maybe that was enough. The winter was quiet. The trail saw less traffic, which gave me time to focus on other projects. I worked with Deanna to finalize the forest inventory. I attended conservation trust meetings. I helped the county conservation board develop new land protection strategies. And slowly, the tension that had been living in my shoulders for months began to ease. In February, I was invited to speak at a regional land conservation conference in Asheville. The topic was private land stewardship and community engagement. I almost declined, but Diana convinced me to accept. "You have a story worth telling," she said, "and people need to hear it." The conference was held at a hotel in downtown Asheville. I arrived early, nervous and underprepared despite having spent a week working on my presentation. Deanna met me in the lobby. "You're going to do great," she said. "I'm a land manager, not a public speaker." "You're a storyteller. You know this land better than anyone. Just talk about that." The session room was bigger than I expected, with at least 80 people in attendance. I stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and took a deep breath. "My name is Marcus Hammond. I manage a family land trust in Flat Rock. I'm here to talk about what happens when your community doesn't believe you own your land." I told the story: the woman on the trail, the police deputy, the HOA meeting, Diana's research and fierce advocacy, the use agreement, the heritage trail. I talked about my grandfather and the legacy of black land ownership in the South. I talked about the importance of standing your ground even when it's exhausting. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping, and the applause spread until the entire room was standing. A man approached me after the session. He was older, maybe in his 70s, with dark skin and kind eyes. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "I'm Robert Hayes. I own land up in Madison County. I've been dealing with similar issues with my neighbors. Your story gives me hope." We talked for 20 minutes. He told me about his own struggles, and I gave him Patricia Chen's contact information. By the time we finished, 3 other people were waiting to talk to me, all with their own stories of disputed land and questioned ownership. Diana found me an hour later, still talking to conference attendees in the hallway. "You're a hit," she said. "I think I accidentally started a support group," she laughed. "Good. People need it." That night, Deanna and I had dinner at a restaurant overlooking the French Broad River. The city lights reflected on the water, and the February air was crisp and cold. "I'm proud of you," Deanna said over dessert. "For what? For not backing down. For turning a terrible situation into something meaningful. I couldn't have done it without you. Sure, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." I looked at her across the table. Deanna, who had shown up with county records and fierce determination. Deanna, who had believed me without question and fought for the truth. Deanna, who had become my partner in conservation and, somewhere along the way, something more. "Can I ask you something?" I said, always. "Why did you care so much? About the land, about the HOA situation, about all of it?" She was quiet for a moment, turning her water glass in her hands. "Because I've spent my whole career studying forests and ecosystems, and I've learned that everything is connected. When someone like Karen questions your right to be on your own land, it's not just about property. It's about who gets to decide what matters, who gets to be heard, whose history counts. And I refuse to be part of a system that lets those questions go unchallenged." "That's a good answer." "I'm full of good answers," she smiled. "Also, I like you, that helped. You like me. Don't sound so surprised. You're smart, you care about conservation, and you have excellent taste in dogs. What's not to like?" I felt something warm spread through my chest. "I like you too." "Good." Because I was about to be very embarrassed. We left the restaurant and walked along the river, talking about everything and nothing. About conservation work and family histories and the way light moved through old-growth forests. About hopes and plans and the future we were building, one careful decision at a time. Spring came early that year. The trail opened up with wildflowers and birdsong, and visitors returned in steady numbers. I hired a part-time intern through the Conservation Trust to help with trail maintenance and visitor education. Her name was Sarah, and she was a recent environmental science graduate who approached the work with enthusiasm and care. In April, Gregory Walsh called me. "Marcus, I wanted to let you know that the HOA board is formally recognizing your contribution to the community. We're including information about the Hammond Heritage Trail in our welcome packets for new residents, and we're asking everyone to respect the use agreement." "I appreciate that, Gregory. I also wanted to tell you that Karen Sutherland has resigned from the HOA board. It was her decision, not ours, but I think she recognized that she needed to step back." "How is she doing?" "Better, from what I hear. She's been volunteering with a land conservation group in Hendersonville, learning about property rights and stewardship. I think she's trying to do better." "That's good to hear." After I hung up, I felt a strange mixture of relief and satisfaction. The fight was over. The land was protected. The Heritage Trail was thriving. And somewhere in the process, I had built something bigger than I'd imagined. Diana came out to the property that afternoon for a follow-up survey of the old-growth stands. We hiked the familiar trails, her with a clipboard and camera, me with a measuring tape and field notes. The work was routine now, comfortable in its rhythms. "I've been thinking," Deanna said as we measured a massive white oak, "about what you said in Asheville. About black land ownership and legacy. Yeah, I want to help tell more of those stories, not just yours but others across the region. There's so much history that gets erased or forgotten. If we could document it, preserve it, make it part of the public record." That's a big project. All the best projects are. She looked at me. Would you help? You know people. You have connections in the conservation community. Of course I'll help. We spent the rest of the afternoon planning. Deanna would apply for a research grant through the university extension. I would reach out to land trust networks and historical societies. Together, we'd build an archive of stories and documents about Black land ownership in western North Carolina, making sure those histories were preserved and accessible. As the sun began to set, we sat on a fallen log near the chestnut oak stand, watching the light filter through the canopy. You know what I realized, Deanna said. What? We make a good team, we do. So maybe we should make it official, I looked at her. What do you mean? I mean move in together, pool our resources, work on conservation projects as actual partners, not just collaborators. She paused. I mean build a life together, Marcus, if you want that. My heart was beating hard. I want that. Yeah. She kissed me, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Like all the pieces had finally fallen into place. We moved in together that summer. Deanna gave up her apartment in Hendersonville and moved into my house at the edge of the trust property. It was a small house, built by my grandfather in the 70s, but it had good bones and a view of the forest that never got old. We worked together, lived together, and built something neither of us could have created alone. The Heritage Trail expanded with new interpretive signs and programming. The archive project secured funding and began documenting stories from Black landowners across the region. And the land itself continued to grow and thrive, protected and cherished. 3 years after the incident with Karen Sutherland, I stood at the trailhead of the Hammond Heritage Trail with Deanna and a crowd of about 100 people. We were dedicating a new interpretive sign, this one featuring a photo of my grandfather standing on the land the day he bought it. The sign read, James Hammond purchased this land on August 12, 1962. At a time when Black families in Appalachia faced discrimination and violence for asserting their right to property ownership, James worked 3 jobs to afford these 240 acres. He held onto this land for 33 years, protecting it from development and preserving it for future generations. His grandson, Marcus Hammond, continues that legacy today through the Hammond Family Land Trust. This forest stands as a testament to resilience, determination, and the belief that land is more than property, it is heritage. I looked at the photograph of my grandfather. He was young in the picture, maybe 40, with his hand resting on a newly planted oak sapling. His expression was serious but hopeful, like he could see the future and knew it would be worth the fight. Thank you all for coming, I said to the crowd. This land has been my family's legacy for 61 years, but it's more than that. It's a reminder that we all have the right to belong, to claim space, to protect what matters. My grandfather knew that, and I hope that everyone who walks these trails learns it too. The applause was warm and genuine. People came forward to look at the sign, to read my grandfather's story, to take photos and ask questions. Deanna stood beside me, her hand in mine. He'd be proud, she said softly. I hope so. I know so. As the crowd dispersed and people began hiking the trail, I stayed at the trailhead for a while longer. The forest stretched out before me, ancient and patient, holding stories older than any of us. And somewhere in that continuity, I found peace. The land was mine. It had always been mine. And no one could take that away.